If you plan on drafting for fantasy baseball the same way that you did last year or the year before, you're doing it wrong. We knew there were big rule changes coming ahead of 2023 season, so with a year under our belt of these new ways of thinking in baseball, let me explain to you exactly what you need to do and not do to win in fantasy baseball. If you can't wait for draft season, guess what? You don't have to. Join Underdog Fantasy and you can draft right now for MLB Best Ball for the 2024 season. They've got some new contests that just opened up. Check them out right now. If you sign up and use promo code Endgame, you get a 100% deposit match for your first $100 that you put into your account. Try Underdog Fantasy today. The biggest change that everybody was talking about was the pitch clock, right? Talked about it for a long time. Nobody seemed to want this, very few at least, pitchers especially. And so we thought maybe this will have a huge impact on pitchers. Maybe ERA and WHIP will jump up. Batters will get the edge. Base runners will get an edge. And so what happened? Well, that was only partially true, but a lot of it was way overblown. For those who aren't aware, for the first time in the history of Major League Baseball, pitchers had a pitch clock, kind of like in basketball, a shot clock, or in football, a play clock. Now, all of a sudden, baseball has gone modern. So with the bases empty, pitchers have 15 seconds between pitches. With runners on, it's 20 seconds. So what happened? Well, not a whole lot. In fact, ERA and WHIP league-wide didn't jump up. Sure, there was some slight variation from previous seasons, but it wasn't the effect that some people thought. Most pitchers actually just adjusted and figured it out. League-wide BABIP, that's batting average on balls in plays, did go up to 295 from 289 the previous season, but really that's just the same level as it was back in 2019. This is just typical year-to-year variation. There was no significant impact because of the pitch clock to team batting averages. The vast majority of starting pitchers were kind of the same. So if there's any change from year to year, it was just them personally. Where we did see some change was from closers. In fact, if you look at the data from before last season, some of the longest deliveries, the pitchers who took the most time between pitches, the slowest if you want to call them that, they were almost all relievers and specifically ninth inning guys. Again, most of them really weren't affected. Devin Williams of the Brewers was on that list. Guess what? He had his best season ever. Kenley Jansen, maybe a little bit worse, but I really don't think it was the pitch clock. It's just that he's now, 36, and he had been losing his stuff for a little bit of time now. Aroldis Chapman was on the list. He was just fine, put great numbers up again. The two guys that really did see a drop, and maybe because of that, were Emmanuel Clase for the Cleveland Guardians. He saw his batting average against jump up by 75 points. His ERA more than doubled. And then Giovanni Gallegos of the Cardinals, he saw his xWOBA increase by 47 points. His hard-to-hit rate jumped up quite a bit. But interestingly, his walk rate actually went to a career low. Now, he had a rocky season. He wound up losing the job at some point. But let's face it, Gallegos isn't some guy who's been like a rock-solid closer for years. He's always been a little up and down. So I think the pitch clock might have something to do with it, especially early on. But still, a lot of this just was more hype than nothing. So what do you do now as far as draft strategy with this new pitch clock? Not much. In fact, I would say don't discount pitchers, especially elite pitchers, because you're worried about this, because maybe you saw their ERA go up a little bit last year. It could just be normal variation, could just be regression. Don't worry about it. But it did have a big impact in one way, along with bigger bases. That's right, another rule change from last year was that the bases themselves increased in size. They went from 15 inches to 18 inches. And along with that, pitchers now had a maximum of 2 pickoff attempts. Thankfully, you can't just keep stepping off, throwing over repeatedly, lead to all the booing in the stands. Nobody likes that. And this gives runners an edge. Once you've thrown over once, there's a good chance that they can take a bigger lead. The bigger bases, the pitch clock, all that led to, predictably, a massive leap in stolen bases. In fact, we saw more stolen bases in the majors than any season since 1987. There were 3,503 steals across the majors last year. Back in 87, that was 3,585. No season since then had come even close. In fact, in the previous decade before 2023, none of those seasons even ranked in the top 20 in total stolen bases from now since 1987. We saw 18 different players go over 30 steals last year, and of course the historic season by Ronald Acuna, who managed 70 along with 40 plus home runs. Yeah, so things changed, but what does that mean for fantasy? It means you can't treat steals the way you used to. A lot of times in the waiver wire we talk about cheap steals. You pick up a guy, he gets you 15, 20, give you a big boost in that category. That doesn't work anymore. Sure, you can still find steals on the waiver wire or get some late, but you can't just ignore that category because there are so many more steals to go around. You kind of have to prioritize at least one big base stealer early. But the good news is you have more options. In fact, the first round of fantasy drafts are going to be littered with guys who are 5 or at least 4 category studs and can get you 20 or 30 plus steals along with power, average runs, you name it. I also think that punting steals just isn't even a realistic option anymore. It was already risky to begin with. I'm not a fan of punting categories in general because you're basically telling yourself that you're going to be at a disadvantage before the season even starts. But if you do this with steals, I just don't think it's viable because you're really not going to make up for it that much in the other categories. And you don't need to do this because, again, there are plenty of guys who can get you steals. And then the other big rule change for last year was the shift is gone. The defensive shifts have been effectively banned. There are some particulars to this. You have to have at least 2 on either side of second base. You can't have guys switching positions. No funny stuff. So again, let me tell you what didn't really happen was we didn't see the whip for a lot of pitchers really go up that much. In fact, for some pitchers it went down. But here's what changed. You don't have to worry about extreme pull hitters maybe having their batting average suppressed because it was getting kind of ridiculous, to be honest. You're seeing 3-4 guys on one side of the infield, and there's no chance that somebody who's a dead pull hitter without speed is going to get a base hit unless they're hitting an extra base hit. That means we saw some big spikes from guys who had career years like Cody Bellinger, Corey Seager, Ronald Acuna also in that group, and Matt Olson. Also a big bump from some, let's say, lesser-known players, or at least not big stars. Marcell Ozuna had one of his best seasons. Josh Naylor was huge in terms of batting average. And Isaac Paredes, you know what he does is pull the ball. But when it doesn't leave the yard, he's still able to get some base hits here. So you can focus more on guys who don't have speed and are more power slugger types. Then you don't have to think of them as batting average sinks anymore. But I want to emphasize this again. You think that pitchers are at such a disadvantage, but we really didn't see a huge drop in terms of performance from most pitchers. And if so, it was about them and not about the rules. Now the final question is, will all this carry over to 2024? Now that teams know exactly how these things played out, will they now adjust to last year's adjustments? Well, I think that we're still going to see plenty of teams trying to steal because it worked. Throughout the history of baseball, it's been marked by eras. First was the dead ball era, the live ball era, the steroid era. What era are we in now? I guess we can call it the modern era. Just 3 years ago, 2021, the stolen base rate per game was the lowest it had been since 1964. 0.6 stolen base attempts per game. That is half as much as it was since the live ball era. Remember, keep talking about 1987? It was 1.21 stolen base attempts per game, and now we're back there. And so are we going to see offense and just major league games go like they were in the 60s and 70s? Maybe not, but I will say we have to accept that the changes happen, just like we have the universal DH everywhere. One season, we're used to it. Get used to what happened last year, adjust for it. Don't draft in fantasy like you did a year or 2 ago because things have changed a lot recently. If you want more draft strategy for fantasy baseball, including some of the players I am big on this year, check out this playlist.